Hello guys, welcome back to Basketball Fan. When you really take a step back and look at how the Indiana Fever approached the expansion process this year, one thing becomes clear almost immediately. They almost certainly made sure to protect Sophie Cunningham. Not maybe, not probably, almost certainly. And the reason this matters goes far beyond just keeping one player on the roster. It gives you a real glimpse into how the front office is thinking about building around Caitlin Clark and how they're trying to shape a roster that can actually compete over the course of a full WNBA season. Because here's what a lot of people overlook when they talk about Sophie Cunningham: she's incredibly hard to replace. On the surface, you'll hear people in free agency debates or online discussions say, you can find another player like her. It sounds reasonable at first, but that idea falls apart when you really break down how winning teams are constructed. What Sophie brings to the table isn't flashy superstar production. She's not out there putting up 25 points every night or dominating highlight reels. What she gives you instead is something far more valuable over time: consistency. She's the kind of player who will deliver a solid performance almost every single night. Not perfect, not spectacular, but dependable. And over the course of a long season, that reliability becomes one of the most important factors in winning games. Star power absolutely matters. Players like Caitlin Clark will always be the engine that drives the offense and captures the spotlight. But the real difference between good teams and average ones comes down to the players around those stars. It's about whether your role players can be counted on night in and night out, and Sophie Cunningham fits that role perfectly. What makes her even more valuable is her mentality. She brings the same level of effort and energy regardless of her role. Whether she's in the starting lineup or coming off the bench, there's no drop-off in intensity. Coaches love that because not every player can handle shifting roles. Some players thrive as starters, but struggle when their minutes are reduced. Others can shine in short bursts, but can't sustain performance when given more responsibility. Sophie doesn't have that issue. She adapts without hesitation. Her versatility is another major asset. While she's primarily a wing player, comfortable at both the shooting guard and small forward spots, she's also shown the ability to slide up and play the four when matchups require it. In certain situations, she can even take on secondary ball handling duties, which gives the coaching staff more flexibility in how they structure rotations. There were even stretches early last season where she effectively operated as a backup point guard behind Caitlin Clark, helping stabilize the offense when needed. When you combine that level of adaptability with consistent performance and a team-first mindset, it becomes obvious why the Indiana Fever would prioritize keeping her. Players like Sophie Cunningham might not always get the headlines, but they're often the glue that holds everything together, and that's exactly the kind of piece you don't let go if you're serious about building a contender. Now, to be clear, welcome back to Basketball Fan. When we talk about Sophie Cunningham, we're not saying she's a natural point guard. Her handle isn't elite, and if you put her up against an aggressive full-court press like what the Connecticut Sun like to run, she can struggle a bit with tight ball pressure. But that doesn't mean she can't help initiate the offense. What she does have is a strong basketball IQ, and that allows her to read the floor, make smart decisions, and keep the ball moving efficiently. And that's the key difference. Your secondary ball handler doesn't always need to break down defenders every possession. Sometimes, what you really need is someone who can keep the offense organized and make the right pass at the right time, and that's something Sophie Cunningham does very well. But where she truly earns her value is on the defensive end. She's not an elite lockdown defender, and nobody is claiming she is. Her footwork isn't perfect, and she doesn't have the same raw defensive tools as some of the top perimeter defenders in the WNBA. However, what separates her is discipline, and that's something you simply can't teach easily. You often see high-scoring guards who have the physical tools to be good defenders, but their focus leans heavily toward offense. Players like Caitlin Clark and Paige Buchers are great examples. They absolutely have the talent to be solid defenders at the professional level, but because they carry such a massive offensive workload, their defensive discipline can slip at times. They might lose focus off the ball, overhelp in the wrong situations, or conserve energy, and that's completely normal for star players. Role players like Sophie Cunningham, though, have a different responsibility. Her job is to stay locked in on every single defensive possession. Don't switch off, don't lose your assignment, and don't take unnecessary risks. Just play smart, disciplined basketball, and that's exactly what she does. She's the kind of defender who will chase shooters through screens, stay attached to her assignment, and avoid the kinds of mistakes that lead to easy baskets. She understands when to fight over screens, when to stay home on shooters, and when not to overcommit. She's not going under screens against shooters who can hit pull-up threes, and she's not leaving the corner exposed just to overhelp in the paint. If you were to rate her defensively, she probably sits around a 7 or 7. 5 out of 10 on a good night and maybe a 6 on a bad one. And again, that consistency is what makes her so valuable. There are players in the league who might flash an 8 or 9 defensively one night and then drop all the way to a 4 the next. Sophie isn't like that. She stays in that reliable middle range almost every game across a long season. And in a league where consistency can make or break a team's success, that kind of steadiness is incredibly important. That's exactly why players like Sophie Cunningham are so difficult to replace. Welcome back to Basketball Fan, because this is where the conversation gets even more interesting. Every time Sophie Cunningham's name comes up, someone inevitably brings up Mikayla Timpson and her potential. And to be fair, about a year ago, there were plenty of people who were extremely high on Timpson. You could see flashes of what she might become, the athleticism was there, the upside looked intriguing, and it wasn't hard to imagine a scenario where she developed into a very impactful player. But in professional basketball, potential only matters if it eventually turns into production, and that's where things have become concerning. The reality is that her development hasn't progressed the way many expected. One of the biggest red flags showed up during her time overseas with USK Prague. Playing overseas is usually where young players sharpen their skills, gain confidence, and earn consistent minutes. It's often the perfect environment to work on weaknesses and grow as a player. But in Timpson's case, she struggled to even get on the floor, and that's a major concern. When you're an import player in a European league, especially a non-EU player, teams typically prioritize giving you minutes because you're occupying one of their limited international roster spots. So if an import player is getting regular DNPs, that sends a strong message. It means multiple coaches have evaluated the situation and decided the player isn't ready to contribute at that level. Now, that doesn't mean her career is over. Player development is rarely a straight line, but it does mean teams will be far more cautious when evaluating her upside moving forward. And that brings us right back to the expansion draft, where 2 new teams entered the WNBA, the Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire. Expansion teams face a unique challenge because they're building from the ground up. They have to decide whether to prioritize long-term potential or players who can immediately stabilize the roster and contribute. When you look at the type of players Portland targeted, it becomes pretty clear what their strategy was. They leaned toward recognizable, reliable players, guys who could help establish a connection with fans right away and give the franchise a solid foundation. A great example of that approach is Bridget Carleton, a dependable wing who brings experience and defensive value. And when you compare Carleton to Sophie Cunningham, the similarities really stand out. They're similar in size, play comparable roles, and both serve as reliable rotation pieces for their teams. You could argue that Carleton might be a slightly better defender, while Sophie has the edge as a shooter and playmaker. Overall, their impact is very close. So if Portland was willing to select a player like Carleton, it's not hard to imagine they would have had strong interest in Sophie Cunningham if she had been available, especially when you factor in the marketing side of things. Expansion teams don't just need talent, they need recognizable players who can help build excitement, sell jerseys, and establish an identity from day one. Sophie Cunningham fits that mold perfectly. If she had been left unprotected, there's a very real chance Portland could have selected her. She's the type of player who can quickly become a fan favorite and give a new franchise a familiar, competitive presence. Instead, the Indiana Fever likely made the smart and safe decision by protecting her, and honestly, it was probably the right move. When you're building around a generational offensive talent like Caitlin Clark, what you need most are steady, dependable role players who understand their responsibilities and execute them consistently. Sophie Cunningham checks every single one of those boxes. She might not always grab headlines, but she represents exactly the kind of player that winning teams rely on over the course of a long season. So now the question shifts to you. Do you think the Indiana Fever made the right call by protecting Sophie Cunningham? Do you believe another team would have taken her if she had been available? Or do you think teams should still be betting on potential players like Michaela Timpson over proven, reliable contributors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown here on Basketball Fan, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.